and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
It has been said that the greatest tyrannies are always perpetuated in the name of the noblest causes. How many crimes of those in power can we attribute to this proverb? This is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineering Watch News, the weekly edition of the Global Alert News Hour for March 25th, 2017. This is a commercial-free news hour program paid for by GeoEngineeringWatch.org. This show is broadcast on KQMS throughout Northern California on 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM. Global Alert News is also aired on the East Coast by the PRN Radio Network and other affiliate stations, Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Recordings of this show can be found on GeoEngineeringWatch.org under the Recent Radio and Top Stories sections and the KQMS archives. Weekly reminder on materials at Orchard Nutrition, free to those who will put them to use. As long as we're able to supply these materials, we simply ask that you please put them to use. Materials like Silent Epidemic, the untold story of vaccinations. This is hard data by frontline researchers that any caring parent has a responsibility to view, to research, to investigate, to understand. How can we blindly follow the medical industrial complex that we know in so many ways exists for its own ends, for its own profit, for its own gain? And we know the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, has systematically hidden known vaccination dangers for decades, and Congress will not let their scientists testify with documents they have. This is a massive cover-up. If you care about your children, you have a responsibility to investigate the data that's available to prove the vaccination danger. So pick up this data from Orchard Nutrition, free DVD. There's data on climate engineering and the unimaginable threats that poses. There's data on 9/11. Please put that data to use. Again, you can get that at Orchard Nutrition in Reading. The next library event, free screening of a documentary film, is today, March 25th, 2:30 p.m. at the Reading Library. Free materials will also be available there. The film today is titled Making a Killing. It's a documentary film about the pharmaceutical industrial complex that reveals the profits they are pursuing and those who ultimately pay the price. And I want to say this about mainstream Western medicine. Of course, it has its immense benefits. There's tremendous technology available with Western medicine in many ways. What I'm saying is this. There are unimaginable crimes taking place, cover-ups taking place that directly involve the health of our children and ourselves. And the lethal vaccinations with proven elements in them that are neurotoxins, other elements. Find out what you're injecting into your body, your children's bodies. Get information from Orchard Nutrition. Learn more. Also, Vaxxed. Anyone from their home computer can watch Vaxxed. From cover-up to catastrophe. The incredibly revealing documentary that's a must-see for any parent who cares about their children. This can be viewed online, I think, for $2 or $3. Isn't knowing what you're putting into your child's veins worth $2 or $3? Please consider the ramifications. We have a responsibility to investigate issues of such grave importance. It's not an option, it's an obligation. In regard to the subject of vaccinations and the power structure's attempt to try to normalize having an autism increase in the last 4+ decades of something on the order of 20 to 30,000% increase. Sesame Street is now being used to try to normalize autism in our society. From the New York Times, this headline, Sesame Street introduces Julia, a Muppet with autism. Quote, Sesame Street will add Julia, a 4-year-old female Muppet who has autism, to its cast next month as part of an expanding autism initiative. An expanding initiative to make autism seem normal. For society to accept this as just part of life, to have so many of our children damaged. And those that aren't diagnosed with autism, are they truly healthy when their systems have been exposed to known neurotoxins again and again and again? Some 69 vaccinations by the time they're 18 years old. And we are statistically a very sick society compared to other societies around the globe. When do we ask ourselves why this is happening? When do we look at the facts and face reality? Moving on, legal update. The anti-geoengineering legal effort, still ongoing in Canada, still the government there trying to drag their feet, but the case is still active. I'll give more detailed updates when I'm allowed from the attorneys. We are still pressing on with Freedom of Information Act inquiries in the U.S. There are a number of them out now. Some responses have come back in, and there is data that I will release, I hope, within a week or two that we have discovered with our Freedom of Information Act requests, which is revealing. It's important to consider, as I've stated in previous shows, the U.S. government and agencies all down the line have gone to great length to make it difficult to expose their crimes. The case is most true in regard to geoengineering and the contamination, the heavy metal contamination fallout from it, but I'll give updates in the coming weeks. Now, on that note, the Rhode Island anti-geoengineering legislation has been withdrawn by the sponsor, Justin Price. This is very unfortunate. Who knows what pressure was put on Rhode Island Representative Justin Price. I got a call from Justin about 2 weeks ago that I missed, unfortunately. I tried a number of times to reach him back and was not successful. I have not heard a thing, and now we hear that the Rhode Island legislation to expose geoengineering has been rescinded. No surprise. Those in power behind the curtain stomp out any fire that begins to burn that could expose the climate engineering crimes, because if we can expose climate engineering, it would overturn power structures all over the globe that are participating in this grand and lethal crime, the most mathematically decimating all-out assault against the web of life and the human race ever launched. We must expose climate engineering. One more local announcement before getting to critical headlines today. From 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., the Shasta County Citizens Climate Lobby chapter is holding a, quote, climate advocate training course at the First United Methodist Church. This is in Reading, on East Street. Here's my question about this group and those who lead it. Are they going to finally address the climate engineering elephant in the room? Another question. How can there be any legitimate discussion about the climate without first and foremost addressing the climate engineering weather warfare assault that's going on in skies all over the globe each and every day? And if this group, who claims to care about the climate and the environment, does not address the climate engineering issue, how can we consider such a meeting or such a group anything other than an exercise in blatant hypocrisy? And I personally know those behind this group and attended a lecture they organized at Shasta College to address climate change. And during their entire presentation, with multiple speakers, not a single word about the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all. Not a word. Climate engineering. This fact can only be filed under environmentalism total hypocrisy. I'll say again, there can be no legitimate discussion about the dire state of the climate without first and foremost addressing the climate engineering and solar radiation management issues. So if you want to hold this group accountable, show up to that meeting at United Methodist Church on East Street in Reading from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. today. Bring some climate engineering educational flyers from Orchard Nutrition and see what they have to say about it. See if they're going to be hypocritical with this meeting as they have in past meetings and not addressing the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all. Not the only factor. The human race has decimated the planet. There's no question about that. But there can be, again, no legitimate discussion about the climate without first and foremost addressing climate engineering. Moving on. Headline from yesterday, released by The Guardian newspaper and other mainstream power structure-controlled media sources. Listen closely. U.S. scientists launch world's biggest solar geoengineering study. From that report, U.S. scientists are set to send aerosol injections 20 kilometers up into the Earth's stratosphere in the world's biggest solar geoengineering program to date, which is a complete blatant lie, by the way, to study the potential of a future techno-fix for global warming. Future tests could involve seeding the sky with aluminum oxide. I am quoting from mainstream media sources, headlines from yesterday, stating exactly what we have stated for how many years. This is going on above our heads every single day. When will our sense of reason and logic override the power structure programming so that we can acknowledge what we can see happening in our skies? Jet aircraft spraying aerosols into the sky that blot out the entire sun. We have no blue sky left, disrupting weather patterns, contaminating the entire surface of the planet, by the way, and we're not guessing about that. We have aluminum coming down in unimaginable quantities, which lab tests from all over the globe prove, some 70 in Shasta County alone. And now we have mainstream media, backed by the power structure, pretending that they're only now beginning to launch these experiments. Absolute, blatant, glaring lies. And the journalists behind publishing these lies of deception should be held accountable as accomplices in the climate engineering cover-up. And let's hope we reach some point where we have Nuremberg-type trials to hold media accountable, just like our local media here in Reading, the Record Searchlight, KRCR, and those who work for these media organizations who are doing everything they can to make sure that the local population does not get any credible news about such a dire issue. Is that not a crime? Is it not illegal to help cover up a crime in so many other arenas? Why is this arena any different? If there's a known contamination, we have agencies covering it up, we have media covering up, aren't each of those entities and the people who work in them also responsible? Legally, morally, the answer is yes. And it's up to all of us to help expose these crimes. Moving on, NASA cloud books to falsely teach our children that highly toxic aircraft-sprayed climate engineering particulate clouds are just, quote, clouds. How sick and twisted has our society become? And we have the Sesame Street autism puppet teaching children that it's just normal for many of us to have autism. And NASA teaching children to accept what's being sprayed in the skies over their heads as being somehow benign when it's anything but. And all the people that participate in this kind of twisted deception should all be held accountable, must be held accountable by any society that has any sense of its own reason left. Along the same theme, moving on to commercials now that regularly air, which try to paint the picture of Alzheimer's just being something you get when you get older. This is not normal for society to all end up with Alzheimer's and dementia. Not only are we eating toxic GMO foods and having neurotoxins injected in our veins with the vaccinations, we're living under a toxic cloud being sprayed by jet aircraft, and we have the type of headlines I just mentioned from so many sources pretending that everything we already see and have seen for so many decades over our heads is just an experiment that's going to be done. We have to activate our sense of reason and start behaving like we want to survive on this planet, or we're not going to be here much longer. Another headline from this week. Deceptive headline. Sugar is at the heart of America's health problems. Is sugar a problem? Absolutely. Sugar is poison. But don't such headlines ignore everything I've just gone over? It's just one more log on the camel's back, sugar. But when we're living under a toxic cloud, we're having neurotoxins injected into our veins, we're eating genetically modified organisms that are completely intolerable to the human system, laden with chemicals like glyphosate, of course there are countless problems affecting our health. It's not just sugar. Another report released this week from Science Daily confirms the sort of apathy I've tried to describe within our society that ignores threats on every front. We have this headline from Science Daily. A new report states our highly conditioned populations are unwilling to face reality and make changes for the better. Look that one up and find out more about the type of conditioning that has made our society completely apathetic so far to the converging catastrophes that are closing in from every direction. Time to wake up, or we'll have nothing left to salvage soon. Not just of our environment, not just of the reality we've known, but of our own health as well. Now, to put the following headlines into context, as I've stated show after show, as the biosphere implodes, those in power will become ever more desperate because they're running out of options. They're running out of cards to play. This must be considered. The power structure is absolutely desperate, and they will move toward global conflict as their last option. Here's a headline. Our credibility is shredding in front of us, former NATO commander says. NATO is being used as a tool to fuel global conflict, not to safeguard against it, but to fuel it. And we have NATO exercises occurring on the borders of other superpowers who are tolerating this sort of exercise. Would we tolerate it? I've brought this up again and again. Will we tolerate Russia and China carrying on military exercises on our borders? Of course not. Time for the hypocrisy to end. Another headline: Trump expands special forces deployments around Africa. Why are we in almost every single African country? We have AFRICOM, we have command centers there. Would we tolerate that in our country? And why are we there? Back to resources, back to the imploding environment, back to the military-industrial complex juggernaut of total insanity, desperate to preserve itself, desperate to preserve business as usual. This plugs into so many ongoing atrocities like climate engineering. They're all connected. Another headline: Noted Putin critic warns of tension between Trump and Russia, not collaboration. The whole Trump position of, during the election, claiming that he would try to diffuse such tensions is now clearly appearing to be a lie, as everything Trump does is pushing us toward global conflict, not away from it. So the primary issue on which some people sided with Trump now should be seen as simply deception. And we see more and more maneuverings by the Trump administration that's pushing us toward global conflict, not away from it. Was Obama doing the same? Yes. Was Obama a criminal and a problem? Yes. Would Hillary Clinton have pushed us toward global conflict? Yes. These are simply actors in the play, and it's about time the American population realized that. The individual that holds the office of the president is simply a prop in the play, maneuvered and guided by the shadow government behind the curtain. It has been that way for such an incredibly long period of time. Was this the case with Obama? Of course. Was it the case with Bill Clinton? Yes. The Bushes? Yes. All are simply part of this criminal cabal. And are there separate, splintering factions of the criminal cabal? Perhaps. But even if so, does that make any particular branch of the criminality that runs our government and runs much of the planet, does that make any particular aspect of that group better or worse than the other? It's all part and parcel of the same. When there's not enough to go around anymore, mafia families fight as well. And that's what we have happening within governments now. There's not enough to go around. The biosphere is imploding. Everyone's in a frantic effort to acquire the resources they need to keep their own personal power structures going. That's what's happening. Another headline: Moscow and Beijing join forces to bypass U.S. dollar in world money market. As I've said in show after show, what has allowed the U.S. empire to expand so prolifically all over the globe is the fact that the dollar is the global reserve currency. They can print whatever they want to fund whatever they want. People ask again and again, who's paying for the climate engineering going on in our skies? The central bankers, those who can print as many dollars as they want. That's why we have the Pentagon unable to account for $8.5 trillion since the late 90s. And that's only the figures that we know about. There's an unimaginable amount of money that's never disclosed or surfaces that's produced and printed by those in the central banks. But how long can such a Ponzi scheme go on? No, the American public has been led to believe that this can go on forever, which is completely delusional. We have other first world country populations believing in the same delusion. What's really happening on the ground? Back to biosphere implosion, back to the economy following. Here's some more headlines. J.C. Penney to close 138 stores and to lay off 5,000 workers. Doesn't sound like things are going too well for J.C. Penney. Another headline: America's retail apocalypse, how 3,500 stores are set to close across the country in just the next 2 months. From that report, more than 3,500 shops are expected to shut down in what is becoming one of the biggest retail closures in decades. Chains like Abercrombie & Fitch, American Apparel, and Guess are shutting down branches, as well as major department stores like Macy's, JCPenney, Sears, and Kmart. Another headline to back up the wave of store closures. Sears warns of substantial doubt about the company's future, not just closing stores, but perhaps the entire company going down. This is the card house in which we've built our current society. In so many ways, completely and totally unsustainable. And this is now becoming apparent. A glaring example of that is how many major metropolitan areas, major civilization hubs are built at sea level. Florida is a prime example. And how many, quote, experts participated in that construction, and how much of the population believe that the experts must know what they're doing. So they build cities at sea level that are now already being inundated. And if you don't believe this, search Miami, coastal flooding, and you'll find that they're spending, in some cases, $500 million to pump out just a few neighborhoods. How long can that continue? Completely unsustainable. The grinding up of nature to fuel an expansion of humanity on a finite planet with finite resources could never continue. And now we're seeing the dominoes begin to fall. And for those who don't like this type of news, and those who think that somehow news should be about optimistic things and optimistic stories, and we should all pretend that everything's fine, that doesn't solve the problem. What solves the problem is to face issues head on. And I would remind anyone listening that psychoanalysis states the hallmark of a healthy mind is an unyielding willingness to face the truth no matter how dire. That's a healthy mind. Not the sort of programmed, deny reality to the last possible moment societies that we live in now. That's not psychologically healthy. Another headline. Think the federal debt is 20 trillion? Question mark. Try 100 trillion. More deception. As if 20 trillion wasn't enough. It's much, much, much larger. Even the 100 trillion figure is far short. From that report, Truth in Accounting, TIA, the Chicago-based organization that pushes governments to release accurate, easy-to-understand financial reports, states the debt clock is now ticking above $99 trillion for the U.S. government. The group argues that most of the actual federal debt is hidden off the books in the form of promised future payments to Medicare and Social Security recipients. Quote from this report, the federal government doesn't include those unfunded liabilities on its balance sheet, said Bill Bergman, director of research for TIA. TIA estimates that the federal government owes about $31.4 trillion in unfunded Social Security promises and $44.7 trillion in unfunded Medicare promises. It only owes $7.2 trillion in promised pension and other retired benefits, as if that's not enough. A common stumbling block among many states and local budgets. $100 trillion in debt. We have the stock market trading derivatives that is thought to be as much as a quadrillion. How many people know what a quadrillion is? It's 1,000 trillions. The stock market house of cards is built completely on fictitious assets, again known as derivatives. Completely fictitious wealth. Doesn't exist. These are just numbers on a computer screen that mean nothing as the environment on which our lives depend implodes. Complete smoke and mirrors, house of cards beginning to come down. And the collapse will begin to accelerate as the dominoes begin to fall. Another headline, Mexico's state oil company on the verge of bankruptcy and collapse. This is Pemex I'm referring to. From that report, Mexico's state oil company, Pemex, is a perfect example of the ongoing collapse in the global oil industry. Falling oil prices and declining production are putting severe pressure on the company's financial balance sheet. It has been 4 long years since Pemex posted a small profit. However, since 2012, Pemex has suffered huge annual losses while its long-term debt has exploded. Let me briefly cover some fossil fuel industry fun facts that most are unaware of. The energy required to extract fossil fuel now from the ground has exploded as well. In the year 1900, 1 barrel of oil, the energy contained in 1 barrel of oil was enough to get 100 more barrels of oil out of the ground. Oil was much easier to recover. Now, It takes a barrel of oil to get 5 to 6 barrels out of the ground. It's much more energy intensive to recover fossil fuels now, and the quality of those fossil fuels is diminishing rapidly. That's why the desperation with using energy, quote, sources like the Canadian tar sands are an energy net negative. What does that mean? It means it takes more energy to get that resource out of the ground, processed and transported, than you actually get out of that energy. It takes about 1.4 units of energy in regard to the Canadian tar sands to recover 1 unit of energy in a different form. It's in energy conversion, if you will. In order to get the crude oil that they need, they're using so much natural gas that they're losing energy simply to convert that energy to a different form, an energy net negative. How long can that go on? Let's look at another form of energy lost with the current paradigm of modern industrial fossil fuel driven societies. It takes about 15 calories of energy to transport 1 calorie of food in the first world nations. Massive, massive energy net loss, because we're shipping food from all over the world to our country to keep our shelves stocked, to keep the populations pacified until the last possible moment. How long can that type of energy net loss continue? Shipping food from overseas to America to keep the party going here, to keep the perception of normalcy. And the normalcy bias is incredibly powerful. I've covered that in past shows. How many Americans do each of us know, how many friends, family, associates do we all know that can't believe there's anything wrong in the world simply because the stores are stocked up? Costco, Walmart, no shortage in French fries and burgers at McDonald's, so everything seems normal until it's not. And that moment when it's not is much, much closer than almost any can imagine. And the power structure, as I've stated again and again, will do everything they can to keep that normalcy bias fueled and intact until everything collapses with blinding speed like a tornado in the night. And it's coming. The sooner we wake up, the sooner we pull the power structure's curtain back and expose them and everything they're doing. People in the medical industrial complex, the military industrial complex, the fossil fuel industrial complex, all of them are part of the same cancer. And how many people do each of us know that are, whether actively or passively, a part of that cancer because they don't want to know the truth? They don't want to face reality. As I stated earlier in this show, that is not the sign of a healthy mind. That's the sign of a mind that is off track, has lost its compass heading. Another headline related to everything I've just gone over. Here's the headline. After a collapse, will people grow their own food or plunder others? What happens when there's not enough to go around? The law of the jungle ensues. That's what happens. We've seen that in human nature how many times? And I would ask this. How much food will we be able to grow in soils that have been contaminated and sterilized by the ongoing climate engineering toxic heavy metal fallout? And we know this is the case. We have peer-reviewed study to prove that's what's coming down in our rain, aluminum oxide. Back to the Guardian article I read at the beginning of this broadcast that stated, oh, by the way, we may have to do this soon and we may have to use aluminum oxide, as if it's not happening already all over the globe, as I've said for 15 years, and GeoEngineering Watch for the whole entire time that this website has been online. It's happening now. And I know very accomplished organic food farmers that are telling me they can't grow much of anything anymore. Their soils are sterile. The ozone layer is being torn apart. The excessive UV radiation is keeping plants from growing. The bioavailable metals, peer-reviewed study, proves they affect root systems and cause those root systems to shut down and diminish. The organisms can't uptake nutrients. They can't grow. They can't produce anything. This is happening now. Forests are dying all over the globe. We can't grow food. Food stocks are diminishing. Our government is importing from other countries wherever they can to keep our shelves stocked for all the reasons I've already cited. So back to that headline, after a collapse, will people grow their own food or plunder others? I think the answer to that is quite clear at this point. It's up to all of us to bring these issues to light while there's still something left to salvage. Here's another headline along the same theme. Quote, "Zombie apocalypse. Will it be our future?" We're heading down a very dark path, and it's already reality for many people in other countries that are starving to death. As I reported in a show 2 weeks ago, official figures from the most recognized sources right now state that within the next 6 months, 20 million people will starve to death on our planet. And those figures are likely very conservative. And as this process unfolds, those numbers will go exponentially higher. The planet can no longer support the population that's here. And one of the major reasons why is because of the amount of destruction that's been done by industrialized society, the epitome of which is climate engineering. Many, many sources of damage to our planet, but climate engineering, the single greatest source of destruction overall. The greatest assault against the web of life ever launched by the human race in the military-industrial complex. Another headline. Something to consider. People remain calm as the world ends, video game study suggests. Now, this is what they're really doing with video games, to study reactions of the population, correct? To train them to be heartless, mindless drone operators, to kill people in other countries without a second thought, like it's a giant video game. But they do other things with these studies as well. So back to this study from a video game. This report from the University of Buffalo. Summary. As the world ends, will you lock arms and sing Kumbaya or embark on a path of law-breaking antisocial behavior? A new study based upon the virtual actions of more than 80,000 players of the role-playing video game ArcheAge suggests you'll be singing. The study found that despite some violent acts, most players tended toward behavior that was helpful to others as their virtual world came to an end. Do we believe that? Do we believe that will really be the case? Perhaps right now, in places like America, for all the reasons I've already gone over, the world is already imploding. In so many senses, we have marine life washing up on beaches all over the globe. We just got reports from Florida, yet more die off there. And the fumes coming off the ocean so noxious it was making beachgoers sick. We don't see any of these headlines. We don't see any headlines of the beaches all over the world coated with dead marine life. We don't see that fisheries in other countries are coming back now with nothing, zero. We don't hear about the fact that fisheries have been shut down along the entire North American west coast, and it's not just Fukushima. Fukushima is a huge problem, but we have all the other issues I've mentioned, superheating oceans, seabed gassing going on from thawing methane, hydrate, and hydrogen sulfide deposits, deoxygenating the oceans. We don't hear about any of this. But now we're to believe that because of video game players seem calm as their virtual world falls apart, they remain calm, and we're supposed to believe that that's what society will do? Do you think that that's what will happen when people around you are starving to death? You think they're going to just sing Kumbaya, as this article states? On this current course, we're going to find out a lot sooner than most people can imagine. Another headline that relates to some of what I just went over. Quote, here's the headline. Hundreds of millions of Pacific salmon missing, presumed dead. Government issues emergency order along U.S. West Coast. Japan also suffering. It's happening, but our local media doesn't report it. KRCR in Northern California, the ABC affiliate, doesn't report this kind of headline. The Record Searchlight doesn't report this kind of headline. Thus, we have a population that is completely in the dark and all too willing to stay there until there's no food on the shelves. From this report, hundreds of millions of Pacific salmon missing and presumed dead across 10,000 miles of North Pacific Ocean pasture. That's what the ocean is called because we have the microorganisms that live there, like plankton, which is the base of the food chain, which is disappearing all over the globe. So again, from this report, across 10,000 miles of North Pacific Ocean pasture, declarations from Japan and the USA are reporting a cataclysmic, this is their words, not mine, reporting a cataclysmic collapse of Pacific salmon. The fish are tragically starving as the sea and the plankton pastures have turned into clear, blue, lifeless deserts. Collapse of North Pacific Ocean fish pastures has resulted in a near total collapse of Pacific salmon. It's not just Pacific salmon that are dying in the North Pacific. All forms of ocean life are being reported dead and dying in stunning numbers. Is that report alone not enough to spend an entire news hour on? The oceans are dying. If the oceans die, we die. Very simple equation. If the forests die, we die. If the atmosphere is destroyed, we die. All of it's happening at once. And what do we see on our mainstream media stations of mass distraction? Nothing but mindless, meaningless political theater designed to keep the population completely oblivious to what's unfolding around them until the last possible moment. That's what's happening. Another headline relating to that political theater. Trump's defense secretary cites climate change as national security challenge. At least someone has some acknowledgement of reality within the Trump administration. James Mattis' unpublished testimony before a Senate panel recognizes a threat others in the administration reject or minimize. Anyone who doesn't recognize the planets in meltdown at this point is living in a delusional reality. And this is not about Al Gore. It's not about carbon credits. It's not about the hypocritical environmentalists that won't face the climate engineering issue. It's about reality. Let's all face reality, and perhaps we'll have some chance of altering our course while there's anything left. Continuing from this report about James Mattis, Secretary of Defense James Mattis has asserted that climate change is real and a threat to American interests abroad. The interests abroad are what I've already stated, the pursuit of the empire's resources in everyone else's country. That's what that means. And the Pentagon's assets everywhere means the same thing. We have military bases in 156 countries around the globe. Our military is bigger than the next 10 militaries combined. That's empire. If you don't think that's empire, look it up. That's empire, period. Continuing from the report, a position that appears at odds with the views of the president who appointed him and many in the administration in which he serves. Final statement from that report. In an unpublished written testimony provided to the Senate Armed Services Committee after his confirmation hearing in January, Mattis said it was incumbent on the U.S. military to consider how changes like open water routes in the thawing Arctic and drought in global trouble spots can pose challenges for troops and defense planners. He also stressed this real-time issue. This is a real-time issue, not some distant what if. It's here now. It's kicking down the door now. And so much of the problems that Mattis just mentioned are directly connected also to climate engineering, like the once-in-a-thousand-year droughts that occurred in every single Middle Eastern country that was toppled, as I've been over show after show. Climate engineering, a weapon of those in power that's tearing the Earth's life support system apart and not being acknowledged even by those who claim to be dedicated to the environment, like the environmentalists and the global warming groups, not acknowledging the single biggest climate destructive factor of all. In regard to climate engineering, what's an update from what's happening in that arena around the globe? The completely climate engineered, chemically ice nucleated cool downs continue to be carried out by the geoengineers. Last Thursday, it was snowing in Arizona while raining in Canada, north of Montana. During the same period, parts of Colorado went from a record high temperature in the 80s with out-of-control wildfires to snow in less than a day. The weather whiplash will continue to worsen as the climate system implosion progresses and is further fueled by the ongoing climate engineering global assault. Also, this week in the Arctic ice winter maximum has been officially declared, and no surprise, yet another record low level of ice. This is the third year in a row, just like we've had the third record-breaking global temperature year in a row. There are record low levels of sea ice at both poles, north and south, and the rate of total meltdown is accelerating by the day. And those who buy into the false headlines, to the contrary, are actually towing the line for the power structure and the climate engineers. The bottom line is this: the planet is free-falling into an abrupt climate shift, with the climate engineering assault helping to fuel the overall fire. Short-term, toxic, chemically nucleated cooldowns at the price of a much worsened overall warming. That's what's happening. And many have noticed how incredibly off the rails the weather is. It's about time. Please do some research, find out what's happening around you. Now back to the Pentagon and the Trump administration. The Pentagon is not concerned about national security, meaning the actual safety of our homeland and us, citizens. those who actually run the Pentagon and the military fossil fuel industrial complex are ultimately only concerned about the preservation of their own hegemonic power. A headline from yesterday: Trump administration grants approval for Keystone XL pipeline. From that report. This is no surprise, is it? No surprise at all. That's what we're talking about here. Those who are only concerned about their own hegemonic power, and Donald Trump, like President Obama, like Clinton, like the Bushes, they're all part of the same cabal, different faces of the same coin. President Trump announced Friday morning the granting of a permit for construction of the controversial Keystone XL pipeline, calling it, quote, the first of many infrastructure projects that he would approve in order to put more Americans to work. How much will those jobs matter on a planet that doesn't support life? Something to think about. Continuing from this report, Trump said that, quote, the government too often failed its citizens and companies over the past long period of time. Today we begin to make things right. The $8 billion project would span 1,200 miles connecting Alberta's massive tar sands crude with pipelines and refineries in the Texas Gulf Coast that are particularly well suited to handling the thick oil. Remember, I talked about this earlier in the show. The Canadian tar sands is a very crude energy asset that actually takes more energy to process it and transport it than you get out of it. It's an energy net negative, but that's the desperation of the fossil fuel driven industrialized society that's already collapsing. And when Trump says our government has failed its citizens and companies, how much are we failing our citizens when we're spraying them with toxic elements in the sky as part of climate engineering to mask the true severity of climate damage, and we're injecting our citizens with toxic elements that are neurologically decimating? How deep can the hypocrisy go? When will Americans look at the full reality? Another headline from the Washington Post. This headline published yesterday. The Senate just voted to undo landmark rules covering your internet privacy. As the population begins to wake up to the crimes of the power structure will do everything it can to monitor that population so that they can put out any fire that begins to burn, any fire of awareness that begins to burn. We're in a runaway juggernaut of total insanity, and we're all about to hit the wall. That's a fact. And I want to read a report from Chris Hedges called The Dance of Death that so correctly outlines the path we are on. The ruling corporate elites no longer seek to build, they seek to destroy. They are agents of death. They craved the unimpeded power to cannibalize the country and pollute and degrade the ecosystem, to feed an insatiable lust for wealth, power, and hedonism. Wars and military, quote, virtues are celebrated by the population. Intelligence, empathy, and the common good are banished. Culture is degraded to patriotic rhetoric. Education is designed only to install technical proficiency to serve the poisonous engine of corporate capitalism. Historical amnesia shuts us off from the past, the present, and the future. Those branded as unproductive or redundant are discarded and left to struggle in poverty or locked away in cages. State repression is indiscriminate and brutal. And presiding over the tawdry grand gulag is a deranged ringmaster tweeting absurdities from the White House. The graveyard of world empires, Sumerian, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Mayan, Khmer, Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, followed the same trajectory of moral and physical collapse. Those who rule at the end of the empire are psychopaths, imbeciles, narcissists, and deviants. The equivalents of the depraved Roman emperors, Caligula, Nero, Tiberius, Commodus. The ecosystem that sustains the empire is degraded and exhausted. Economic growth, concentrated in the hands of corrupt elites, is dependent on a crippling debt system imposed on the population. The bloated ruling class of oligarchs, priests, courtiers, mandarins, eunuchs, professional warriors, financial speculators, and corporate managers sucks the marrow out of society and the environment. The elite's myopic response to the looming collapse of the natural world and civilization is to make subservient populations work harder for less, squander capital in grandiose projects such as pyramids, palaces, border walls, and fracking, and wage war. President Trump's decision to increase military spending by $54 billion and take the needed funds out of the flesh of domestic programs typifies the behavior of a terminally ill civilization. When the Roman Empire fell, it was trying to sustain an army of 500,000 soldiers that had become a parasitic drain on state resources. The complex bureaucratic mechanisms that are created by all civilizations ultimately doom them. The difference now, as Joseph Tainter points out in the quote, "The Collapse of Complex Societies," is that collapse, when it comes again, will this time be global and total. No longer can any individual nation collapse. World civilization will disintegrate as a whole. Civilizations in decline, despite the palpable signs of decay around them, remain fixated on restoring their, quote, greatness. Their illusions condemn them. They cannot see the forces that give rise to modern civilization, namely technology. Industrial violence and fossil fuels are the same forces that are extinguishing their existence. Their leaders are trained only to serve the system, slavishly worshiping their chosen gods long after these gods begin to demand millions of sacrificial victims. Quote, hope drives us to invent new fixes for old messes, like geoengineering, yes, which turn into create even more dangerous messes. Hope elects the politician with the biggest empty promise. And as any stockbroker or lottery seller knows, most of us will take the slim hope over the prudent and predictable frugality. Hope, like greed, fuels the engine of capitalism. The Trump appointees, Steve Bannon, Jeff Sessions, Rex Tillerson, Steve Mnuchin, Betsy DeVos, Wilbur Ross, Rick Perry, Alex Acosta, and others, do not advocate innovation or reform. They're Pavlovian dogs that salivate before the piles of money. They're hardwired to steal from the poor and loot the federal budgets. Their single-minded obsession with the personal enrichment drives them to decimate any institution or abolish any law or regulation that gets in the way of their greed. Unbridled capitalism is a machine for demolishing limits. There is no internal sense of proportion or scale, and once all external impediments are lifted, unchecked global capitalism ruthlessly commodifies human beings and the natural world to extract profit until exhaustion or collapse occurs. And when the last moments of a civilization arrive, the degenerate edifices of power appear to crumble overnight. Individuals are driven by two primary instincts. One is the instinct for life, the quest for love, to nurture, to preserve. The second is the death instinct. The death instinct is called Thantos by post-Freudians and is driven by fear, hatred, and violence. It seeks the dissolution of all living things, including our own beings. One of these two forces is always ascendant. Societies in decline enthusiastically embrace the death instinct. And how many times have we seen this in human history? From what happened at Easter Island to the rise of European fascism in World War II, as well as countless other conflicts and scenarios. This is the course we're on. This is the driving force of those who pull the levers of power behind the curtain. An insatiable, lustful, narcissistic, psychotic craving for total power and control that can never be satisfied and only comes to an end when total societal and environmental collapse unfolds with blinding speed. And for the order followers who enable the system of carnage and destruction to metastasize and proliferate until there's nothing left to salvage of the paradise planet we were given. How do these order followers face themselves in the mirror? How do they face their children? How will they face their maker without turning away from the sheer shame of what they've been a willing participant in? How many times I've heard, and from how many misguided individuals, that fighting for the greater good is futile and meaningless. And to such lost souls, we should say this, that we will continue until our last breaths to fight for the greater good, for the whole. That's all that matters. It's all that has meaning. It's why we're here. And lastly, the struggle against the fading of the light is not vain, not cosmically, not karmically, not spiritually. What could matter more than to resolve oneself to stand against the gathering darkness in a rational and unyielding effort to turn the tide of insanity, or perish in the attempt? If we're not here for this, then why are we here? And whatever comes of such an effort toward the greater good, this must also be remembered. Such an effort must, and indeed does matter, in and of itself. It matters in ways that none of us will likely ever fully know or understand with the comprehension that we're currently capable of. Yes, the battle for the greater good matters. And if enough of the human race finds their long-lost sense of purpose and courage, if enough of the human race can toss aside the tainted lenses of the power structure, tainted lenses that they've been trained to look through, to see the world through, a color view of the world that does not reflect reality. If enough of the human race can clear those lenses and see reality for what it is, and we can apply ourselves to what must be done in order to change direction, then maybe, just maybe, we may yet accomplish astounding good, even at this late hour. And how will we know what's possible if we don't apply ourselves completely to doing what must be done? Apply ourselves completely to purging ourselves of bias, ideology, and preconceptions, that we might see the world and what's unfolding clearly, that we might then know what it is that we must collectively do. And I know so many people, or I did know, no longer communicate with them because the message of unvarnished truth is more than they wish to tolerate. But I have known so many people who simply refused to face reality head on. They wanted a spun, candy-coated version of reality, one that is so much of a causal factor as to why we've ended up in this dark place to begin with. We can't deal with reality unless we see reality clearly. And our society has been trained to think happy thoughts, to sing Kumbaya, as some of the information I already covered in this show, some of the studies have indicated. But as the walls really close in, and as there's not enough to go around, and as their reality falls apart around them, do we really believe that such people won't revert to very primitive behavior when they realize that they've been living in a delusion for their entire lives? We've all been living in the power structure created Truman Show, and that for those who have chosen to look at reality, to wake up in this setting every day is truly like Groundhog Day in an insane asylum. And perhaps that's offensive to some people to say that. But how can I not say that when so many refuse to open their eyes and see such incredibly glaring truths, when so many choose to remain in the power structure created delusional distractions designed to ensure that they don't wake up and face reality? And I hope that changes. And I'll continue to do everything I can to bring harsh, unwanted, unpleasant truths to light, in the hopes that enough will wake up, be willing to face these truths, that we might yet at least change the flavor of what we face. And that effort, make no mistake, will take all of us, absolutely all of us. All that we hold dear is now in the balance. All now depends on us. As the Hopi elders said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. I've repeated that proverb a number of times because it's so important for people to realize that. So many people sit on the sidelines convincing themselves that someone else is moving the ball of the field, that someone else will take care of it, that someone somewhere is dealing with the problem. That's not reality. It's up to all of us to get on the playing field and decide what we can do as individuals to move that ball up the field. And those who choose to join the most critical battle for the greater good should examine the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. At the end of every article, at the end of every dissemination, this link and others are there to give instruction. And so many people miss this. I get messages from so many people asking, what can I do? And we post those instructions there to give direction for those who choose to engage in the fight for the greater good. Please examine those links. It's called Activist Suggestions on the homepage of GeoEngineeringWatch.org. Make your voice heard while it still matters. Time is not on our side. We can make a difference if we stand together, collectively. But the time to do so is now. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.
to the Anti-Media Radio with your host Nick Burnaby here on UCY.tv.